Hey guys, Jared Misner with Cool Nerd Games here. Today what we're going to go over is a little bit more of the dueling side of the game board. What we're going to do is first we're going to go over a layout of the board. Then I'm going to give you a detailed breakout of an actual turn. Then what we're going to do is go through how to cast a spell. And then I'm going to walk you guys through a visual representation of how to actually take a full turn. So let's go ahead and get started. And the first thing we'll go over is the actual layout of the game board. Now, as you can see here, this shows all four sides of the game board where each player would be sitting. What you want to focus on is you're only going to be playing from the highlighted area when you play your turn. So everything else on the game board's pretty much irrelevant for your turn, other than each side is identical. So every player is going to have this exact same playing space. Now, there is a couple of sections that you're going to use on your playing surface that are not exactly on the game board. The first thing, as you can see here, is going to be where your deck resides. The next thing that you're going to see here is where your discard pile is. Now, you're also going to be using a life counter. Since you have 20 life, we're going to use 20-sided dice. So this is the part of the board where I usually stick the dice. And then right next to that's where I keep the class card. You can also put your basic turn card here. Most of the time, after you've been playing a few times, most people don't even use their class card or basic turn card, just simply because they don't need it. Because after you've played a few times, you have a pretty good understanding of how the turn works and how your playing ability works with that class card that you've chosen. But if you do need space, this is where I would put it. So now what we can do is actually go through a detailed breakout of a basic turn. Now, there are 7 steps in every turn. The first step is called the ready step. The next is called the resource step. The third is the first spellcasting step. The fourth is the attack step. The fifth is the second spellcasting step. The sixth, the discard step. And the final step in your turn is your draw step. Now, I want to go through a little bit more of a breakout of how each part of this turn works. And then we're going to show you a visual representation of that so you have a better idea also. So for the first step, the ready step, during this step you ready your army to duel by moving all creatures you control in the action zone to the creature zone, and all power sources you control in the used resource zone back to your resource zone. Now, if you don't have any creatures in the action zone or resource zone in the used resource zone, you can actually skip this step and move just to your resource step. And during this step, there's no spells that can actually be cast. Now, the second step, during the resource step, you increase your resource pool by playing a single power source from your hand, if you have one. Now, this is the only time you may play new power sources unless there's a spell or a creature card that says otherwise. The only spells that can be cast during this step are energy surges. So if you don't have a power source in your hand or you don't have an energy surge to cast, you can skip this step and move right to the first spellcasting step. Now, the first spellcasting step, during this step, you may cast any combination of your spells. Now, you do have the ability to choose to skip this step, and you can move straight to the attack step without casting any spells if you want also. If you do skip this step for casting spells and move straight to the attack step, you can actually take what's called the second spellcasting step after the attack step. Now, if you do cast any spells during this step, you have to skip the second spellcasting step. Now, the next step is the attack step. This is where a lot of the action happens. During this step, you may attack with other players with your creatures by moving them to the action zone. Each creature may only attack once per turn, and they cannot attack on the turn that they're played unless a card specifically states otherwise. Attacking with a creature is an action to which other players also have the ability to respond. Now, you do have the second spellcasting step that comes after the attack step. Now, during this step, you can also cast any combination of your spells, but you can only do that if you skipped the first spellcasting step. If you cast any spells during the first spellcasting step, you have to skip this step and move on to the discard step. Now, the discard step, during this step, you may discard any or all of the cards in your hand. The maximum hand size is 7 cards, so if you're holding more than 7 cards, you have to actually discard your hand until you have 7 or fewer. Additionally, what also happens during the discard step is all damage that's dealt to creatures and all unused energy dissipates during this part of the step. And all creatures that are in the action zone that were used to block that did not die or weren't dealt lethal damage are moved back to their controller's creature zone. And then there's no spells that can actually be cast during this step. that brings us back to the last step of the turn, which is the draw step. Now during this step, you must draw cards until you have 5 in your hand. If you already have 5 or more cards in your hand, you have to skip this step, and there's no spells that are cast during this step. I do have a couple of people that ask me questions about, well, what if I don't have any more cards to draw? That's not a big deal. All you have to do is take your discard pile, shuffle it, and actually it becomes your deck again. So you can draw the cards that you need after you've shuffled your deck. That pretty much takes us through a breakdown of the full turn. But what I want to do is show you guys how to actually cast a spell on the deck building board. So what you'll see here is you'll actually see a breakout of a setup of cards that you may have, maybe a little bit later on during the game. But as you see, you're going to have your deck here, you're going to have your discard pile, and you're going to have some resources that are already set up. So in order to actually cast a spell, you're going to take the unused resources that you have, as you can see those power sources, and we're going to move them to the used resource zone. When you do this, you're actually getting the amount of energy that those power sources generate. These power sources in particular are going to generate 1 energy for each one that's moved to this zone. So you're going to actually have 5 energy. And then with that 5 energy, you're actually going to place the card that you're trying to cast directly into the action zone. This is actually going to be Gorvax that's being placed in this zone. As soon as Gorvax is placed in the zone, the player that's immediately to your left gets a chance to respond. The next player gets a chance to respond that's immediately to their left. The next player to their left gets a chance to respond. And then finally, you get a chance to respond to this card being cast as well. As soon as all players have passed responding and all cards have been played, then, as you can see, Gorvax is just going to come straight to the creature zone and be under your control. And that's actually how you cast a spell in this game. Now what I would really like to do is walk you guys through an entire player's turn. So what I'm going to do is actually fast forward this image again a little bit more, and as you're going to see in this, I've got 2 players that you can actually see their cards from. What would be your hand, as well as what the other person is going to have in front of them, their creatures and their unused resources also. So for the first step that you're going to take, that's going to be your ready step. If you look here with the cards that are in front of you, you don't have any creatures that are in your action zone, and you don't have any power sources that are in the used resource zone. So this player is actually just going to skip their ready step. And what they're going to do is they're going to move right to their resource step. And as you can see, this player is going to play a basic power source and put that in front of them to be used. That's all they're going to do in their resource step, so they're going to move to their first spellcasting step. In the first spellcasting step, as you can see, this player has paid 3 energy, or I moved 3 resources to the used resource zone. And from here, they're going to cast Electrocute. That Electrocute's meant to deal 5 damage to any creature. And as you can see, they're targeting the Gorvax that the other player controls. Now, what happens because this spell was cast, everybody gets a chance to respond. So the first player immediately to the left gets their chance to respond first, and that person's going to actually take 3 of their unused resources and move them to their resource zone and cast another spell called Deny. And Deny basically just says that this is going to cancel out the card that's being cast. So now that this person has responded, every player is going to get a chance to respond again. So the person to that person's left is going to respond. The next person gets a chance to respond. The person is going to also get another chance to respond, and it's even going to come all the way back to the player that originally cast that Deny. And so that player is choosing not to respond to that. So as you can see, the Deny happens, it gets moved to the discard pile, and also the Electrocute gets moved directly to the discard pile, and nothing happens during this part of the turn now because the last spell that was cast basically canceled out the other spell that was cast before it. So that player whose turn it is actually going to now move to the attack step. And as you can see, they're going to take both of their Gorvaxes, and he's saying, I'm attacking with both of these Gorvaxes towards the player that he has to target for his turn. And as you can see, as soon as that player says, I'm attacking with these creatures, the player to the left has a chance to respond. The player to their left has a chance to respond. The next player has a chance to respond. And then finally, the person that's attacking also gets a chance to respond. Now, after all those responses have happened, the other player who's being attacked has a chance to choose if they're going to block. This player also has a Gorvax, and he's going to take his Gorvax and block another one of the Gorvaxes. Once this has happened, each player again gets a chance to respond. So the player to that person's left gets a chance to respond, the next player gets a chance to respond, the attacking player gets a chance to respond, and then the person that was blocking gets a chance to respond as well. After all responses have happened, this is where damage is going to be assigned. Now, as you can see here from this image, the unblocked creature is going to deal 6 damage to the player that was blocking, and then the blocked Gorvax that's blocked by the other Gorvax are both going to deal 6 damage to each other. Now, each one of these Gorvaxes has a defense of 6, so they're going to be dealt lethal damage. So when that player takes that damage, the other creatures that were dealt lethal damage are then moved directly to the discard pile. Now, that's going to end the player's attack step. And remember, because they actually used spells during the first spellcasting step, they have to skip the second spellcasting step. But if this player had chosen not to use spells during the first spellcasting step, they would be able to cast spells during the second spellcasting step. Then the player is going to reach their discard step. This player still has cards in hand. They're going to discard 2 of their cards. As you can see, I've done that here in this image. So the player casts a basic power source, they cast an electrocute, and they've discarded 2 spells. So that means they only have 1 spell in their hand, so when they reach their draw step, they're going to get to draw 4 cards. That's going to put them back to the 5 cards, and that's essentially going to end their turn, and the turn is now going to be moved back over to the other players to take their turns until it comes back to this player.